Hello and welcome to the 2023 Steering Committee or Steering Committee Election Retro. I'll do this as usual. So as a reminder, we do operate under a code of conduct, which essentially says to be respectful of your fellow speakers and attendees and generally be excellent to each other. Normally, we would offer an opportunity for anyone new to the call to introduce themselves, but everyone's new to this call because it's a new thing every year. So we could do introductions, but I don't think we need to.
We all know each other.
I think we all know each other here. So, there
Well,
is a
to be fair, do the folks on who may be watching the call later know us?
possibly not.
Very good point.
Should
Caslin,
we
do you want to start introducing yourself and then toss it over to whomever?
That works for me. All right. So I'm Caslin Fields, and I was an election officer for the 2023 steering election cycle, also for the 2022 steering election cycle, and I'm also a co-chair of SIG Contribex. Bridget.
Awesome. I'm Bridget Krumhout, and I was an election officer for this 2023 steering election, new to the election officer gig, and I am a co-chair for a SIG cloud provider. Josh.
Hey, I'm Josh Burkus. I do a number of things around the Kubernetes community, and I'm actually on this as a member of the election sub-project of SIG Contributor Experience. Xander.
I'm Xander. I work on open source at Microsoft. I have done some things with SIG Contribex in the past, but looking to increase my involvement there. As far as the election, I was simply a voter this time around, but figured I would join and watch the retro and then hopefully play a more active role in the next one. Oh, and then let's see, let's pass to Bob.
Hey, I'm Bob Killen, a current steering committee member and also an election officer and co-chair of SIG Contributor Experience. Just wanted to be here and sort of see how things go. I will kick it off to Jason.
Yeah, Jason DeTiberis. This election cycle, I was a candidate, a voter, and most of all, I came by here to congratulate the elections team on all the hard work they put in and how seamless they made the experience, both from a nominee and a voter. So kudos to those who put in that work. And over to Christoph.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christoph Blecker. I am an emeritus member of the Kubernetes Steering Committee, a technical lead for Contributor Experience, and an alternate election officer for this past election. I think I just need to throw it over to Stephen.
Hey, everyone. Stephen Augustus, head of open source at Cisco. I do a few things in the Kubernetes community, including SIG release chair. I am a former steering member and continuing now as a result of this election. And yeah, love to hang out with y'all and again thank the election officers for the great work that they did this time around.
Thank you all so much. So our main goal of our meeting today is to go over what happened during the steering election cycle. This time, we have a doc which has been shared in the chat. I'll grab it again for good measure. And this doc basically has two sections. The first one is things that went well, and the second one is things to improve. Feel free to go ahead and type in any of your feedback, and we'll go over it all live. Shall I start walking us through, I suppose? I think I wrote the first stuff anyway. So in the things that went well section, the first thing I put in is that we held an election. Good job, go team. votes were cast and results were released. So I think that's a win. Next thing I put in, did I put this in? No, I did not, I think. Does whoever put that one in
Yeah.
want to talk about it? Cool.
I put that in because it kind of goes with held the election. Part of holding the election was designing the schedule for the election. I have a shout out later to Josh Burkus, but he was very helpful in helping us figure out how to, hey, we're going to hold an election. Let's fit it into all of the everythings, be it, high holidays or KubeCon or anything else. We just had to kind of fit it into where it would be possible for people to participate. And I think that was something that I should point out so that people who are reading a retro much later will go, oh yeah, we should definitely think hard about our schedule and make sure it works around, public holidays, but also people's vacation schedules. We thank you all for accommodating people's planned travel and or conference participation. That means that slightly later in this week or next week would not work as well.
And I also want to throw in a big shout out to you, Bridget, for kind of spearheading that effort to get the schedule put together. I really appreciated your work there.
I looked at a calendar. I said, oh,
Good
hey,
job.
we need to make sure it's possible that people who are observing holidays can also vote, which is important.
I mean, I will say the fact that the election did not overlap a KubeCon this time, I felt was actually beneficial. In a couple of ways. One was, not, say like we had one where the candidate deadline was at the end of KubeCon. And so I spent a lot of KubeCon tracking down people that I knew were potential candidates to submit their paperwork, which was not fun and I don't recommend. And also in the past, KubeCon itself has been kind of an unfair influence on the elections, based on who happened to get a keynote. And so again, not having that was beneficial for fairness.
And I think
we
last
obviously
time-
can't necessarily arrange that every time because we don't control the KubeCon schedule, but it was nice this time.
I think last time we also didn't overlap with KubeCon, but it was much closer than it was this time.
One other thing I think just kind of magically panned out, the last week where most of the people vote did not overlap with enhancements freeze, because people would be focusing on getting all their everything done there.
That was not magical. We definitely looked at the Kubernetes calendar.
Okay, good.
We should write that down.
Yeah, we should.
Look at
last
release
time it did
schedule
overlap
before.
with that. Yeah, make a list of the things that you looked at. It's a good idea. Excellent.
Anyway, so moving on.
Any other comments on the schedule? Excellent. The next item I put on here is we created the meeting on the Contribex calendar for this retro and also shared the notes doc before the retro happened, but not by much. So it's kind of also an item for improvement, but it was not a bad thing. I did mess up the permissions on the doc when it was sent, but then fixed it quickly after, thanks to Bridget's note. Still better than what happened last year, I think. Yeah, I think it was even worse last year. We were saying it was held on someone's personal Zoom instead of the actual Contribex Zoom, so we couldn't record it last year. So also, I looked at the invite, and the invite last year didn't have the notes doc on it. So we did make some improvements. Yeah.
Quick question on the invite. Who does the invite go out to? Because this seems like a thing that would be completely reasonable for like it to be an invite sent to steering at or Devat.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't send it to Devat. I sent it just to Contribex, I think. I should have done that. Note for next time.
So I think, and at the very least, including the steering at handle, because that is at the very least of people who are interested in steering things.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
And that should get added to the docs if it's not in there. which I
Yeah,
don't think
one
it
of-
is. Which I don't think it is.
Yeah, one of my items for things to improve, I'll go ahead and mention here, is that we need some updates and some creation of some comms guidelines in the GitHub, I think, which I would like to try to do this week.
When I went looking for the invite for this, I found the email that Caslin mailed to DevAt. So I think that you did
Oh,
link
that's
to
true.
and mention this in an email to DevAt.
And
But
steering
since
at,
it,
but
and
I didn't
yeah,
invite them directly to the meeting. Yeah.
I would say that like if we're sending an actual calendar invite to DevAt, I'm not sure that would necessarily be the most useful thing because it's a very wide audience. We don't necessarily expect thousands of people to join this meeting. And the people that would join this meeting, I don't know, would necessarily have the context. So I think linking to DevAt is a good thing, but directly inviting steering at in addition to the existing list, I'm +1 on that.
Yeah. Just as
great point.
like calendar invites to DevAt usually don't work or have issues because the list is so large and it gets throttled. You have to send from a non-Gmail, like an actual valid, like full domain name, not a free address, and that gets through it.
This is really helpful. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions, comments, concerns on the sending of this meeting? Cool. The next item I also put in, which was we worked with the comms sub-project to support the comms work. So I am also a sub-project lead, but I tried to kind of run this as if I wasn't to some degree. I think we have it in the docs for the election that we should be able to work with the comms team to support our work. So if someone who was not directly a part of the comms team was running comms for the election, they should know to interface with the comms team to help them get their work done. So the way I did that this time was I actually have a shadow for social media lead in the sub project, and I asked them to help me with this. So I added them to the comms doc early on. We went through it and talked about the timeline of when we needed which comms. We set deadlines for when those comms should be written and when we were going to go over them together. And that was really, really helpful. That person, Arpit Agrawal, who, big shout out. Thank you very much, Arpit. I should put him in the shout outs channel. He wrote a couple of emails. Mostly he just revised the messages that were already in the comms doc. But it was nice to make use of someone else in the comms team to get some of the work done so that it wasn't all on my shoulders. Questions, comments there? Cool. The next one is kind of related. I did use last year's comms doc as a guide, which I just happen to have and be able to find because I did it last year, but we need to make sure to put that in a place where it is easy to find. And also the doc was kind of messy. It wasn't designed to be used really as a template. It was designed as a thing that I used to actively do the comms last year. So it was a little bit messy, but definitely useful in getting the job done. So should definitely put that in the GitHub. Next item. I don't know if that was me
Yeah,
or not.
I mean, by the way, I would say ultimately for reusability, it would be nice to break out each of those templates into a separate file and drop them into the templates directory,
Ooh.
the instructions. But somebody has to get around to doing that.
I have it on my list to try and do that this week because I'm going to be out starting next week.
Right.
So I'm going to see how much I can get done.
Let me also suggest if you have a brand new contributor to the comms subproject who hasn't done anything at all before, that's definitely a task that somebody could take on without knowing anything. And then they would have a chance to look at a bunch of templates for comm stuff and maybe learn something in the process.
Yeah. This Arpit was relatively new. He wasn't very familiar with steering. This was his first time being around for a steering election, and that did work out all right. So that is a good idea. Thank you for that point. An excellent one. All right. Next item, Bridget.
I think Caslin did a good job of sending some emails and some social media, and I put a couple of things on Kubernetes Slack, and I think I saw some other teams doing more reminders on Slack. And I think that Caslin mentions later the fragmented social media sphere, and I think we do want to make sure to find, whether it be Slack or other things, places where contributors are looking, where we can remind them to boost voter turnout. Because I think one of the things that people kept telling me is, oh, I intended to vote and I allocated 10 minutes between meetings, and I clicked on it and I went, wow, there's a bunch to read. I'm gonna have to come back to this. And then it would take time for them to come back to it and realize that, hey, look at that. I have a lot of reading and considering to do.
And that is an area where I would hope that in future election cycles, the comms team could help, because we try to keep an eye on what's going on in those spaces and have a presence there. So hopefully that's something we can make good use of in the future. And big thanks to Arpit for that, because the whole process of working with him on it helped keep me on task better than I did last year. It's great to have some help.
And we talked about the documentation a bit before, but I'll just give a shout out to Josh, because he put a bunch of effort into writing some docs that I then tried to use. And as Christoph is pointing out, like, oh, turns out when I'm trying to use something that I've never tried to do before or read before, I immediately have questions and end up putting pull requests in. And so I think there was a lot of collaboration there.
Well, I mean, this is really the first use of those written docs, right?
Yes.
We haven't used them before. So I'm very excited about that. And I think it really is a step forward, right? Because now with the written docs, with the improved written docs, we're in a position where we're not entirely dependent on someone having been in an election committee before in order to be on one.
Exactly. So that is good.
Yeah, and also, now that those docs are improved, they're going to get a bit genericized, and we're going to offer them up in the CNCF, because there's a few other projects that use Electo and provide sort of a general guide of how you run a project election on Electo.
So I, just to step backwards and apologize, I think what we have seen, at least in terms of voter turnout, has been roughly consistent across the years. Are we talking about how we can improve that? Because right now we're roughly at that 30% line.
Oh,
think it's
yeah.
been
I
But we
know
got
that
up
that
to
should
the,
be in the improvement part, but like,
Well,
uh,
yeah,
but
and
like a
that's
week or so before the conference, a week or so before the election, we weren't at the 30% line. Like, I think we do have to do reminders to get people even
Yeah.
to what we think the baseline is.
and also that's been a slow decline over the years, because our first steering election, we were at more like 42%. And basically we lose 1 to 2% participation every year. Now, one of the things that would be interesting to do is to actually measure that against the contribution participation.
Yeah.
Because although wait, people have to have both contributions and org membership, so we are theoretically talking active people. I think the previous thing kind of pinned it down for this particular election, which is, I would argue that we had slightly depressed participation this election because people had difficulty with the number of candidates they had to choose from. And to support evidence of that, if you actually look at the anonymized ballots, there's a lot of use of no opinion, a lot more than we've seen in previous Kubernetes elections. And that says to me that people were like, oh my God, I can't read up on every single one of these candidates. So it was great from a candidate perspective, right? It was terrific that we had, more than enough candidates to fill the spots, but it was a little troublesome for our contributors in terms of, they can't set aside 10 minutes to vote. They need to set aside at least a whole hour. and as a result, some of them probably never got around to voting.
Right. Also, in some of the ballots that we saw, it was like a single candidate. They cared only about their candidate and not other candidates, right? So that was very apparent looking through data.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and-
that's a trend to keep an eye on, because I've seen this in a few other CNCF projects, and that can get pathological.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go for it. I had no, these are, so the results that are published are people who absolutely completed a ballot. Okay, all right, because I also saw some like 11s across the board, which was really interesting. So I have questions. Christoph.
I think this is a great topic, and I definitely want to get into it, but I also want to be mindful of time considering we're still in the what went well section of the retro. It'd be great if we can like speed through the rest of what went well so we can get into and have more time in the last half an hour for some of these discussions about ways that we can improve.
Sounds good. I believe the next item is basically yours. There's one in between, which is no Zoom issues, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. So, Christoph, would you like to speak about the next item?
Yeah, just want to call out that like I really am grateful that we were updating the documentation as we go, and wanted to specifically call out Bridget. It was fantastic having your fresh eyes on some of this stuff, because those fresh eyes definitely highlighted where there was gaps in documentation, gaps in process, things that were, you know, for lack of a better term, tribal knowledge, that we know how we do these things, but just hadn't got it written down. So that was extremely helpful.
+1 to that. And the next item is Stephen.
Yeah, so I think, you know, last time we had a discussion around whether or not we wanted to publish the rankings at all. And I think it's important to have that visibility, I think both for the community and for the candidates to know where they stand with the community. So kudos to the election officers for getting that ranking up really quickly. The PR is still open, so this is also a reminder to LGTM approve that.
Thank you for that. Loading that in right now. I should do that. Cool. So that closes out the things that went well section. I think we're ready to move into the things that could use improvement section. Josh will need to drop. Thank you for joining in though.
Yeah, could I take my one remaining item for things to improve?
Yes,
before I drop?
please.
Which is, in terms of voter turnout, one of the things that a bunch of people have done sort of informally is send a reminder out to Kubernetes contributors at their company. I think that's actually reasonably effective in getting voter turnout. And I think one thing that the next election committee could do is draft a template for what we consider an acceptably neutral version of that, so that people are not trying to, like, you know, promote their own candidates, and then send that out to folks with the suggestion of, you know, hey, remind your coworkers who work on Kubernetes that the election is going on.
Great idea. I can add that to the templates that I'm working on because I sent one of those myself, which
Yeah, I
I
also
copied from
recommend
Bob's
that-
template.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I actually said to my colleagues, like, hey, go look at this list. If your username is in this YAML, go check out this voting.
Yeah.
If you think you're on the verge of maybe being in it soon, look into the exception process. But
yeah,
go look and see if you're on this list. If you are, your opinion matters. I'm not going to tell you anything about who of these 11 wonderful people to vote for, but you should go vote.
Yeah, another thing I put under this when we were talking about, you know, the no opinion voting and that sort of thing, is I want to keep this on because it's been on the election officer thing forever. What I wanted to do is to do something more to promote the candidates in an even-handed way. You know, whether it's a video panel, whether it's blog posts in the Kubernetes blog, whether it's something else, because I do think we definitely saw this election the impact of people not feeling they had enough information about all of the candidates. And while the candidates have their bios, that doesn't quite seem to be enough.
I like that idea. Thank you very much, Josh. Maybe we should hold a meet the candidates session.
Yeah, so I think my suggestion in the last one was we combo that with the Q&A. Right, so there's a steering Q&A, and then if that meeting is
Wow.
either extended or just like we do a little bit of both, because like you are meeting the candidates by way of them attending that meeting, if they spent some time doing an intro to
That's
themselves.
We could
That's
write
also-
down the fact that we didn't hold that.
yeah, that's also something I just remembered. We didn't manage to get that scheduled this year.
Yeah,
The
that was my last point.
the one thing for if you want to meet the candidates, especially if we comboed that with a Q&A, we're being a lot of candidates this time, that would definitely go long. That one I do think it's worth scheduling and doing, but like we might want to play it by ear depending on how many people are actually running. Christoph?
Yeah, I have some general concerns with a meet the candidates kind of thing. So just some background history. When we first did a Q&A for steering committee candidates, a lot of folks used it as a meet the candidates kind of thing for like the public to come to a meeting to hear the candidates speak, which on its face sounds great, like offering more opportunities for the community to meet their potentially future elected representatives. Great. That said, it has some unfortunate side effects. People can get into platforming, which isn't great. There's a mix of like people endorsing other people and backing other people up, whereas like if you're currently on the steering committee, there's like rules around how much you're even allowed to campaign for yourself when you're serving on steering committee. And lastly, it's very like having a synchronous meeting to do that is very like time zone specific. So if you aren't in the time zone where that meeting is happening, where that meeting is being present, like, and it kind of creates an unfair advantage if that meeting is held in one area. And even holding multiple meetings doesn't necessarily solve for that, because you're going to get different audiences that attend those meetings, again, synchronous based off of time zone. If there was a way that we could offer that opportunity for the community to meet their candidates in such a way that doesn't involve a synchronous meeting like that, that might be like a better solution. Like, at least what I'm figuring out in my brain is like, in addition to the bio, can we say like you also have the option of recording like 60 seconds or 2 minutes or something like that of like a quick intro bio video that you can attach to your thing as well. But even with something like that, as I'm saying it out loud, there's some issues with that potentially too, depending on like, again, if it like, if a video is produced really well, does that give you an advantage unfairly over other candidates? So I don't know necessarily what the right answer is here, but just a caution that like anytime we are offering as the Kubernetes community a platform for people to advocate for themselves as a candidate, there's some risks there depending on how we execute on that.
Excellent points. Thank you, Christoph. Stephen.
Yes. No. Yeah. No. Great points, Christoph. I think my feeling towards the bio is that it is I think it gives a lot of space and opportunity for you to provide, where you are on the internet and how you're doing and what you're about, outside of just what's contained in the bio. I think maybe, one we definitely, I think it's useful to have that steering Q&A if it is truly only the steering Q&A, making sure that that is scheduled. And two, I think, what goes into a successful bio, perhaps, or how can we increase the readership of the candidate bios? I think if we all do the contribution work that we do in the community, and I think the part of your contribution is also contributing to the election cycle of the community in showing up. So I understand that everyone has a lot of things going on. We really all do. But I think reading the candidate bios is a base requirement to participate. So
We do try to highlight candidate bios in the comms. At least I try to call that out. If you're going to vote, please also read the candidate bios, but only so much we can do there.
And just to be clear, like, y'all have done a great job at doing that. I think it is partially on the community to be invested in reading those bios as well.
That's a good thing to continue doing, though. Make sure that we call that out in comms.
Something else that we've encouraged in chair and TL is to, like, at least for the chairs, to make mention of the election and the details in those meetings. We could also just try and like encourage them to like mention, like, please read the bios, or like, you know what, we're going to take 10 minutes at the start of this meeting and we're all going to read the bios. Just make it mandatory fun.
Are we also asking I know that we were maybe hitting the chairs and TLs. Are we also asking them to carry the message into their respective meetings that you should be voting, that you should be?
Yep.
Catching up. Okay.
That's a great point. Make sure to bring up in SIG meetings, open source meetings. Excellent. Let's move on to our next point. We've got quite a long list. See how much we can get through. I just added this in while we were talking, that the steering Q&A for candidates did not get scheduled this year. We should try and do that next year, I think, is kind of the thing on that. So we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, we can move on. I'll put a note about why I didn't schedule it, which was basically, it was not super clear how to pick the date or who to invite or how to dictate the date, or was it democratically picked, or did it have to be attached to a steering existing public meeting, which it didn't line up with, yada, yada, yada. I will make a note in the doc on that.
Some interesting ideas on that. And I'll share some context from previous years. We just worked with steering to say, hey, when would be a good time for this? And so we're barred on steering getting back to us on when is a good time for everyone, which is already hard enough for steering to plan on a regular basis. Adding one thing in sometimes doesn't work, as we saw this time.
One option might be just like, we're taking over this month's steering public meeting. Show up here.
It should be. That's what it should be.
Yeah.
Full stop.
That
okay.
I wanted to do that, but it couldn't line up.
Yeah.
Couldn't line up. If we had to choose between, did we want that or did we want to announce results at a steering public meeting? Those were our choices.
Gotcha.
And I didn't want to give up the announced results.
I mean, that sounds like in steering's court to make it line up for that month at least.
There's also like, there is a monthly private meeting of steering that people, like, at least we block out our time for. So like, that is a potential option where we just basically schedule the a public meeting for that purpose in that same time slot to make sure most of steering is there.
Yeah. Can be tricky to get scheduled. Thank you, Bridget, for taking some notes on this in the doc. I'll let you continue writing out those notes. And I guess I'll move on to the next point. which is we've already talked about creating comms resources in GitHub. We also remembered that a blog post was a thing at the last minute. I don't know if it was Dims or Bridget found a previous one and was like, hey, do we need to do this? And I had completely forgotten that existed. We didn't do one last year because we forgot that it existed. So we definitely need to add in that. We need to add in kind of a guide in the GitHub on like, here are the comms that need to go out. Also in 2021, that was actually a request to the comms subproject. The election officers didn't write the blog post. They said, hey, comms, could you write a blog post for us? And then we did that. So
Yeah.
that is another thing
Also-
that can happen.
Also, to Bob's point in the chat, if the blog posts predate Kates.dev, I think the directions that existed also predated it, because I literally heard of Kates.dev from SFTM yesterday. And I was like, that's nice. I super didn't put it there because I didn't know that existed. So let's improve that for next time, which means improving it in the docs, which is why I wrote it here.
And
Much
not knowing about
appreciated.
it is something else that we have to improve.
Yeah. That is also a tricky thing in the comms subproject that we've been kind of figuring out is when do we mirror things to both pages and how do we manage that process? So yeah, good place to leverage the comms team. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is related. We could have done more with social media this time. We focused a lot on getting the emails out, but I at least really did not focus on doing social media posts because every email did not accompany a social media post, which makes sense because the social media posts have a much bigger audience. They're not as detailed, but also they're great to do frequently. So there's like some trade-offs there that I just want to record in our docs about how this works. Also, social media is kind of split up these days because of all that's going on with Twitter. And that's something that the comms team also keeps track of. And we're trying to make sure that we have presences on various social media and things like that. So usefulness there. Next item, also me. There were a few mistakes that I specifically made in sending comms, sending things a little bit early, or sending things without the right links, or lots of little mistakes that I think having clearer guidance could help us watch for and catch better in the
It keeps
future.
changing, Caslin. Don't even worry. The three of us caught a bunch of stuff too. So
Yeah, it was nice that we caught them and we
yeah.
like replied and we tried to make them clear, which mistakes happen. That's having clear processes for what to do when a mistake happens is also part of having comms guidelines, which is a good point.
I can spot a mistake on someone else's email in like an instant. And I will pour over an email for an hour and I'm like, this is perfect. It's ready to send. This is the most beautiful masterpiece I've ever crafted in my life. And then I hit send. And the second I hit send, I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So
you become blind to your own mistakes.
Mhm.
So I hear what you're saying, Stephen, is it's always a good idea for us to leverage at least one of the other election officers to read something before
some
we
eyes
send
on
it, if at all
That was
possible.
that was a good way of turning it into a lesson. Yeah.
And we did, one thing we did for that this time was when I worked with Arpit on the schedule for when we would create drafts for all of the comms, we made sure to leave a bunch of time before the comms would actually have to go out so that there would be time to send it to the election officers for other people to review. Plus there was already a built-in kind of redundancy there of having Arpit write the initial draft and I would review it. But still I wasn't that great about making sure that I got the drafts in the election officers chat to ask for review. So that's something that can be improved as well. And a note that is on this in the notes doc is some of the issues with comms were around the anywhere on Earth time that can be a little tricky to communicate because it's like, hey, this day has already passed for you, but it's due today. It's very tricky to work out in comms for a variety of reasons. So, and I think, Bridget, you probably put this in there. We did update some docs around this.
There were places it was very ambiguous in the initial docs, and it is significantly less ambiguous now, with examples showing the anywhere on Earth thing, because we tripped over it. Hooray.
Still more that could be done there, but I'm sure more tripping will happen in the future. Time check, 15 minutes. So let's move on. Next item was also me. This is something that I put in last time and then I didn't fix in time for this time. But it would be great to have a virtual I voted badge or something that people could like post on social media and be like, hey, I voted in the steering election. You should vote too. So I'm going to try to make a little draft of that. This week, I also posted in the Crafter Netties channel saying, hey, we want to have this for next year. So that would be great to have. Cool. Next one. I think that wasn't me, actually. Was that me? I don't know. I can read it out, though. The next item is... It might have been me. Forgot to create this retro doc until after the election announcement. I don't know exactly what that means because we did create it before the election results announcement publicly.
I did write that down. I wrote
Okay.
this down because I remember we talked about we should start putting our thoughts into a doc for the retro.
We did say that. Yep.
And then I did not do such a doc. And then I was digging through all of the past Slack stuff, trying to find things that we had said, we should put this item in the doc. And I'm like, creating doc, finding items we said we would put in doc that didn't exist. And I think psychologically for me, the barrier was literally, do I really want to put a doc in my Google Workspace? There should be an official place that the doc lives. I don't want to own it because then it's impossible to move it. And, you know.
I did create this in the Contribex and I created a new folder in Contribex for elections.
Perfect.
So there will be a place in the future and we should document that. That's great.
Just as a quick FYI, I've brought it up at least with the other Contribex leads, but I also I need to bring it up with the rest of steering about just provisioning a shared drive for everyone. We can create subdirectories under there for each SIG or working group and go from there. And elections could, exist under there too.
Do you want to do a one-time thing for this, Bob, with leads, for example, use the leads Google ACL to create the drive and have permissions to create directories? I don't want everybody in the community to be able to go create.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, it'll be, don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
But I have to bring it up with steering first because I have to provision it through SC and do it that way.
Yeah, and we don't want to, like I was thinking about the infrastructure part, like I didn't want to manage that explicitly.
And we do have about 10 minutes left. We'll move on to the next item. We're good there.
I think we already talked about reminders and voter turnout. Was there something more we should add for that?
I think kind of a lot of that will be around documenting all of this stuff. And we've talked about a lot of the solutions there. So I think we're good. Next item is you, Bridget.
I added a couple of notes about the way exceptions worked because there were two places I noticed it caused confusion. One was that as far as I could tell, when some election officer clicks in the Electo interface to say, we have reviewed this, that doesn't indicate, that doesn't do any kind of push notification to the person seeking an exception. So the only notification they're going to get, I think, is if, and maybe it displays it somewhere in there, I don't know, but if they sit there and watch GitHub and see their name go into the voters.yaml file, like that would inform them, but they might not know to look for that. And so I think we ended up just having to do out of band. Hey, we've approved your exception. Go try to vote now. And I think we probably need something at least documented, if not like improved technically. I don't know if anyone knows more about that.
The one Electo does not gather email addresses. It's
Okay.
just using GitHub for OAuth, so it can't really send an email notification.
Sure.
But it can like I believe it has a notification inside the app if you revisit the page. But that
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't able to test that, so
yeah,
um,
something to bring up with Josh.
okay, so there's that, and then the other thing is, I think we need to revisit our wording around exceptions, because there was one enthusiastic individual who thought that getting an exception meant they could add themselves as a late breaking candidate, and I think it's a little, the language is a little ambiguous, and especially when we're talking global audience, it can be confusing. So I think that's kind of a revisit, because it says something about, you know, get an exception for the election. That's like, get an exception so that you can vote for the election, not so that you can be a candidate. And so I put a note in here, and I haven't put a pull request in anywhere yet. It's just something I thought of.
Maybe we just start referring to it as a voter exception.
Perhaps.
Yeah, that's the move.
To me, that's like the simplest language change that we can make that makes it more clear.
Yep. Okay.
Next item.
I added the next one too, just because I wanted to note that that pull request was still open. I believe Stephen has things to say on that.
I do. So I know we kind of went back and forth with this one, and we came up with a bunch of potentially reasonable solutions, but wanted to run that stuff by Code of Conduct Committee as well, and have a meeting kind of synchronously to talk through some of the potential ways to fix this. One of the potential ways is actually staggering the elections so that we can't run into a conflict situation. But I think given the timing, we actually got to the point where the potential conflict, at least for this election, was resolved. So, or could not occur. So we were like, okay, let's pick it up following the elections. But yeah, we are due to schedule some time with Code of Conduct Committee to talk through.
Stephen, the sequencing will also become important, right? Like the steering election should come first and then the code of conduct. Otherwise, we'll have the other problem there.
Yeah. My personal feeling is that you should not want both. Like they are, they're fundamentally different jobs, and they take different like brain space and power. So, but yeah, I think one, staggering it will fix it. Two, the steering committee is the glamorous one, and should probably go first to resolve it. But I do put glamorous in quotes because there are people who are driven.
Staggering it.
I saw your face doing that.
Putting it after the steering election also means that former steering members could potentially, go for the COCC.
So yes, to be resolved. We're steering's on the case.
Cool.
Thank you very much for that. The next item is a Josh item that we already talked about. He's left, but I'll read it out. We should write an example of an acceptable internal big company reminder of the election and then suggest to people that they send that reminder internally. I think that's a great point. Next item. Don't know who put this one in. Need to remember to invite steering to the retro. We did talk about that a little bit earlier. Don't invite dev just send them a link to the calendar, but do invite steering directly to this meeting. And we should add that to the docs. Yes. Another item that we already talked about. I think these are notes that we already talked about, which is good.
Yeah, these are notes. I would note for this no opinion one. Sorry, actually say it. Oh,
Go
I
ahead.
will-
Okay.
uh,
Heavy use of no opinion in voting. Is it significant?
So as a voter, I still don't know what no opinion means. And if I have no opinion on someone, they get voted 11th. That's basically how it gets handled. But yeah, I think helping people understand what no opinion means in the context of how things will shake out would be useful.
That could probably be a small PR to Electo to just have a better explanation for it, like on the voting page.
That would be great. Because I was just thinking, like, more docs, yay! People are already intimidated by the amount they have to read to vote in the election. How are we going to get them to read this? If it's in Electo, I think they would read it.
The docs will continue until morale improves. Yeah.
I like it. Another couple sub-bullets on this. Voters were blocked by the number of candidates. They didn't have the time to research them all. Some voters vote only for their own coworkers, which we don't want. Think about doing more candidate promotion, and we discussed that quite a bit earlier.
I do have one potential idea for this, and send one email out at some point with literally a copy and paste of all the election bios.
I like that.
Because people, like, with it being in their inbox, I can see them, potentially reading that more, or at least, control Fing and finding it versus going to the page. Stephen?
Yeah, I would agree there, because just if you want to read all of the bios, you do have to put in a little bit of work of like opening up each individual bio. And it's like, okay, I've got 11 tabs open now. How have I read this one? And like, so I get that. I do think if you're going to be voting, it is your responsibility if you're reading the bios. But I think getting that all in one email would be probably helpful for both.
It's a great point. Thank you.
If we go that far, would it be further to add like a calendar entry or a reminder as well for the election? Hey, the election's
I mean,
closed
maybe
tomorrow.
maybe that's something that can go on the steering calendar as well, right? It's like, hey, remind, like, because if you're, I feel again, if you're invested in being part of that steering mailing list, you're invested in some of the things that are being said or by or about steering, and may want those calendar invites.
You kind of like that idea. Would we send that to a larger audience? And if so, what audience? We were talking about how there's issues with sending calendar invites to Dev because it's so large.
So if
May
it
not
is,
be all.
if you send it as elections, the group email, or another like Google or Microsoft, basically a actual non-free business account, the calendar invite will go through versus a free email address.
Hmm.
It's just an anti-spam prevention thing.
Should we?
It would make sense to send an email to people who are members of the GitHub org, but then we don't have that mailing list. That is the problem.
Oh, actually, now that once we get all our accounts under the GitHub Enterprise account, we can do notifications through there. So
if they have set up the correct email address.
No, in GitHub.
Okay.
There's a little like feature now that will have a little.
Oh,
like,
there's
banner.
a banner. Yeah,
there's a banner now at the top.
Okay.
Once we get all the orgs under the enterprise account, so that can be a reminder mechanism once we have completed all that.
Oh, that will be awesome, because they'll stare at that page all day long. So good.
That sounds really cool. We are at the top of the hour.
I did have one thing I wanted to you all to think about, which is Apache uses this for ASF membership. 3 times if you don't vote in the annual elections, then basically you're clocked out. So if you want to do something like that to prune the GitHub org memberships and also like show people that they have to care.
At least Electo right now, I don't believe reports that information of who actually voted.
Agree. So
Yeah.
we have to improve the tools to that point where we can, this is an option. Right now, it's not.
But that's
Noted.
definitely a policy decision. I noted that that's definitely not getting decided
Yeah.
in this retro, but thank you
Understood.
for
Yeah.
bringing it up.
Yeah.
And on an interesting note.
That's a thinker for sure.
Yeah, a very interesting point.
Compulsory elections work in Australia, but I don't know if everybody is going to send a barbecue to everyone's house.
The voting will continue until irrelevant.
Wonderful. That is our whole agenda, and we are 1 minute after the hour. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. We got a lot of really great notes in here. We should try to do what we can to implement these or get them rolling this week. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in the election officers channel on Slack.
Thank you again,
you very
election
much.
officers. Awesome work.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.